Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. You are in the Graying Jedi chambers. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther. And from the great Force beyond, joining us is Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Welcome, gentlemen. We are moving in to the third arc of Andor Season 2, a heavy and consequential arc that shows us a lot of the characters finally meeting up. I don't want to get too deep into detail without turning it over to Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, but let's just say things happen.
Thank you, Jedi Master UrzaMaster. Thank you, Jedi Master Lord Uther. And thank you, Graying Jedi fans. Yes, indeed, we are in Arc 3, Season 2 of the Gilroy clan's Andor. Tony, the showrunner and creator of the show, he wrote the first arc set at Mon Mothma's Chandrillian wedding and having Cassian stranded on a planet that turns out to be Yavin 4 with a bunch of malcontents. We also saw the first seeds of the Gohrman campaign being planted in that first arc. In Arc 2, written by Beau Willimon of House of Cards fame, we met the resistance of Gohrman, and we also saw a plot by Cyril Karn to try to stir up the resistance on the planet in the name of outside agitators. And it's important to note that because Cyril believes that very officious, bureaucrat-loving, I always follow the rules type of fellow, he believes that in law and order, he believes in towing the line, and so he thinks what he's doing in the service of the Empire is morally righteous and just. And as we're about to discuss, suddenly he has a certain point of view altered with those regards. So that brings us to Arc 3, written by Tony's younger brother Dan Gilroy, who is an accomplished writer himself. He worked on the Jake Gyllenhaal, I believe he wrote and directed Nightcrawler, which is a very underrated, almost icky thriller, which stars Dan Gilroy's wife, Renee Russo, whom you'll recall all the way back from Major League, Lethal Weapon 3, Free Jack. Renee Russo was the it girl there in late 80s, early 90s, Warner Brothers franchises and the such. So Dan married her, put her in Nightcrawler, a picture he directed. He also worked on the best of the King Kong updates, in my opinion, Kong Skull Island, which basically took King Kong and put him in Apocalypse Now. And if you don't think those two taste great together, go ahead and check out Kong Skull Island. It is so much better than any Godzilla versus Kong team-up that we've had thus far. It's actually funny, it's off-the-wall crazy, and it's just, with Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson, it's just a lot of fun. And Mr. Gilroy was responsible for most of that final shooting script. In Season 1, he worked on the Aldhani arc, which of course was the heist of Imperial payroll, and in which Cassian was first recruited by Luthen, ends up joining Val and Cinta, and a young idealist who writes his own manifesto against the Empire. Aldhani was terrific television. Aldhani, The Axe Forgets, and The Eye were the three that Dan worked on. So now here he is back in Season 2 with Messenger. Who are you? And welcome to the Rebellion. So we're going to talk about Dan's work very soon. We should also mention the director, Ariel Kleeman, did the first 6 episodes of Season 2, both Tony and Beau Willimon's arcs. He is replaced on these 3 by Jonas Metz, who is a Danish filmmaker and documentarian. Stateside, he worked on HBO's True Detective, a critically acclaimed mystery thriller series. He directed the 2017 Borg versus McEnroe, and that's not a Star Trek spinoff, that's a tennis movie. and it starred Shia LaBeouf as John McEnroe. And if you haven't caught that one yet, and you're a tennis fan, then Borg versus McEnroe 2017 might be worth your look. I fell in love with one of his espionage thrillers from 2022, starring Chris Pine. Did not receive a theatrical release. I believe it went straight to Amazon. But boy, was it written and directed within an inch of its life, called All the Old Knives. And it does star Chris Pine. And he basically it takes place in flashbacks and flash forwards and sideways. But basically, there's a mole in the agency, and he thinks it might be his former lover. And so he brings her to a dinner to confront her. And over the course of an evening, they go back and forth as to who's playing who might be the spy, who's being set up. And you'll be on the edge of your seat if you like that style of storytelling. So I absolutely recommend All the Old Knives. Chris Pine, I believe it is streaming on Amazon, and it's definitely worth a look. So he brings that kind of tough, taut energy to these 3 episodes. And gentlemen, I want you to guide us in the ways of the Force and this discussion, because really these 3 monumental Star Wars chapters, they really come down to 3 different threads, all of which we should discuss, but in what order and how significant you find each of them will be up for debate. I want to talk about Cyril and Dedra and Cyril's awakening. I want to talk about Mon Mothma and the Senate, and finally making the choice between which line she chooses to stand on. And I want to talk about Bix and Andor and the choice he is prepared to make and the choice that she ultimately makes for him. Gentlemen, like I say, just absolutely speechless here. So tell me how any of those 3 or all of those 3 landed with you, and what were your thoughts on the Dan Gilroy arc of season 2?
All right, I'll take point. First, shout out to getting us to Yavin 4. It was really cool to suddenly see Yavin and see what the Rebel base looked like before the events of the original trilogy, and kind of what it looked like off base, right? We get to see this sort of house in the woods, which is Endorish, but very cool. And getting to see, Will coming back from whatever he was doing with Saw Gerrera, and I don't know. It seems like they kind of dropped that thread a little bit. I don't know if they're going to pick it up in the next arc, but that moment, it led me to question, and I think that's like the first episode in this arc really kind of makes you question everybody's loyalties and who can trust who, which is what they're doing. Like they're trying to build this up. It really starts to reach a fever pitch in this first episode. That's like, geez, I don't like Andor's going off with Will, like that seems like a mistake. And then what's going on with Bix? And are they trying to create a life together in Yavin, or are they trying to? What are they really doing outside? Because it seems like why is he still fighting? And of course we get the answer, and Bix making the decision basically in the end of the 3rd episode to say, no, I'm not going to let you abandon this. Like, we need to win this. And that's what they've been preaching all along. If we're going to do this, we do it to win. We do it to survive. And you get that shift from self-preservation in season 1 to, doing for others. And then you get that moving into for the greater good, which is really cool to see. But the whole Rebel Alliance is starting to come together, right? They're getting some form, some function, some formality. It's going from just a rebellion against individual battalions of the Empire to rebellion against the Empire to what will eventually become the New Republic. And of course, Mon Mothma, who has been escalating in her involvement and escalating in her disdain for what's going on this whole time, is finally making that choice. That's been a long time coming, and that Luthen basically has been preparing her for. She's been, lovingly ignorant to starting to see the full picture, to knowing the full picture and having to grapple with the emotions of that, like in the last arc, or last two arcs here. And then now she's entrenched. She's like, I'm bought in. I have to do this. Like, literally, we just committed a genocide. And it's such a great commentary on the politics that they've been building, because original trilogy, it's good guys and bad guys. It's very black and white. It's been pretty gray this whole time. Like, aside from what we know they're doing with the Death Star, we know where it's heading. The characters we've been seeing had no clue the greater, and they still, to a large extent, don't know the greater implications, even though now we've got this massacre, and it's like, all right, we're not going to stand for this. This is open massacre for no reason. It's obvious propaganda. The crackdown on Palmo is just, I mean, it's so predictable, but it's also so just like, I mean, these things have actually happened in history many, 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 many times. So to watch it was just heartbreaking. And that's where Cyril fits in, is he's bought hook, line, and sinker. He's truly been a believer, a true believer, not just a fake sort of, I'm doing this for my own gratification, which I think I've always thought Dedra was the one doing everything for gratification, and not a real believer, but somebody who's just in it for themselves. And she's realizing, of course, now too, she's also being used by the Empire.
Yes.
And I have a feeling that after this, she's going to probably fall into that category of, they're using me anyway, I'm just going to buy in for self-preservation, and they're not going to get rid of me because I've done such a good job. But she's completely expendable. They don't care. They really don't. And that's, I mean, you see it with these like trainee, enforcers that they throw in there. And the first thing they do is like, all right, shoot one of them so it starts a riot. Holy cow. Like, I mean, it's CIA level stuff going on. And, Cassian really, again, I kind of look at Andor as being not really a main character almost in this arc, and kind of through the series, he's sort of just tying all these loose ends together. And as he meets these people, that's what's bringing them together. He's bringing Mon Mothma from the Senate to safety, and that's going to unite the Rebel Alliance. He's running into Cyril. He's tying up those loose ends, and poor Cyril, had he not suddenly attacked Andor, which, I mean, he's completely emotionally broken, which is probably why he decided to do it, he might have gotten out of this as a rebel.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing here, is like, there's so much grayness that happens. Graying Jedi, ba-bing, ba-bing, there's the thing. Hello there. At the end of this, like, it really breaks your heart to see Cyril go, and his mother, who's an abusive, horrible person, is even shedding a tear over the situation, not knowing, but knowing that this has probably been the case. It's so much an emotional roller coaster that I don't know in any other Star Wars production that you could have achieved this. It's very French Revolution. It's nuanced. It's layered. It's incredibly complex. But it really does paint a picture of good versus evil at the end of this arc, where you have a really strong leaning on both sides that you didn't have before, quite frankly. You had maybe an overbearing, tyrannical government, but it wasn't necessarily as bad as we're supposed to believe in the original trilogy. It's kind of hard to know, honestly, up until you get to this point. And I think you could make the argument that's like we said in the beginning of this, the Empire worked for a lot of people, which is why post-Empire you get all those First Orders and Grand Admiral Thrawns and people who want the Empire back because the New Rebellion or the New Republic is not benefiting them, like the Mandalorians. It's a lot. It's very complicated to control a galaxy, and this is giving us that shades of gray as it transitions to good and evil, which is just, this show needs to win awards for this. For these episodes in particular, every one of these actors should be walking away with some kind of a golden idol in their hand.
I just like that we saw Cyril hoping all the way up almost to the end that the Empire wouldn't do something like that, right? Like that the
Right.
Empire was bringing order. That I think that's what, and that people kind of needed to accept that the Empire was actually a good thing, and I like that he struggled with that all the way up until the very end. Same thing with, I mean, and then we have Dedra, and how she's willing to screw over her boyfriend, hoping to move up the chain of command, and she winds up being a patsy just like he was, right? Like a patsy chain of command at some point. And then I like how they show the diabolicalness of people in the Empire beyond the Emperor. And that's the other thing I wanted to add, too, is that I like how we've heard a lot about the Emperor throughout the show, but we never saw him. And I was teetering on that. Did I want to see him at some point? But we didn't really need to see him. So I like that, again, we know, as we stated last episode, the Emperor's a busy guy taking meetings all day long, like my wife does. And, but he has a 4 o'clock with Vader and then a 5 o'clock with Krennic, and we just didn't need to see him. And so that winds up being a good thing, too. I think I was going to bring up all the loose ends that are out there. We don't know where Luthen's at. I kind of like that. We don't know where Bix is at. Where's B2MO? I mean, or B2EMO? Like, what happened to him? I mean, so I kind of like that there were some threads out there. And then I don't know if either of you saw this, but they showed an episode from Rebels where Mon Mothma is on the ship. I've been seeing a lot on
The
reels
Ghost,
and
yes.
stuff, and she on the Ghost, and she gives the speech, and then all these ships show up to basically form, or maybe formally form, the Rebel Alliance in a sense. And then last night, as you guys can tell, I'm a little under the weather here. I put on Rogue One just to kind of see where we're at, and I love that within the first few minutes, Cassian is dusting dusts a couple of stormtroopers, and then he winds up dusting the guy that gives him the information and tries to get away, which lines up with what he kind of did in the series. So kind of giving it a little bit of an anti-hero stance on that, I think. I feel like he's the Han Solo of this whole thing, which is what I think they kind of set him up to be in a sense. But it's probably the Han Solo we should have had. Again, he shot first, and I'll always go with that notion. It's just, this is what Star Wars should be at different points, right? We didn't have to see the Emperor. We didn't need to. I mean, we saw a Jedi, kind of. We at least saw a Force user, right, healing him. So I like that those things really don't come into play. And again, I like how they just continue to show us that this wasn't about Luke and Vader and Jedi and Sith. That this was it was a massive empire. And again, watching Rogue One adds to this. So if you guys have a chance this weekend at some point, or check out Rogue One again, because it plays perfect seeing all these different planets. It's just a different context from the first time I had seen Rogue One, right? But all these different planets, how large the empire is, excuse me, what they're trying to do. This episode, I feel like it's one of the few prequels that does it right. It gives you that information without forcing it down your throat or forcing to make connections. It all just kind of happens naturally, which is what I liked about Rogue One as well.
All right, gentlemen, it's a sort of a stream of consciousness here, but work with me and jump in when you think you need to. Starting with the Force Healer. It's obviously the first overt reference to it, and you can tell from Andor and Bix's dialogue, just like Han Solo dismissed it as a hokey religion. Again, most of these people, they don't know Jedi tenets. All traces of the Jedi have been eradicated by this point after Order 66. No one is reading from the sacred texts. We don't. The only Jedi that are still out there are in hiding or have lost faith. By contrast, in the timeline, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series, took place 9 years before the Battle of Yavin, and this current arc is 2. So you can see that, even back then with the Inquisitors hunting them down and so forth, we've even gone further forward. So, but what I loved about the Force Healer, she doesn't strike me as a Jedi in hiding, like I'm just biding my time and waiting to strike back. This is just a person that has that communal connection to that life force and has discovered a way to use it, channel it productively to heal. And so even when they bring the Force in, the Gilroys do on this show, it's not Obi-Wan taking up the saber again to save young Leia and so forth. It's somebody who people dismiss as a kook. Oh, she's over there healing in the mess hall, people who come with wounds and stuff. I don't believe it. It's all a scam. It's a fake, blah, blah, blah. And then she goes and she does heal Cassian, as we've seen Rey and other Jedi do. And I like I say, it's very subtle. And it's not like I used to be on, Coruscant in the temple. I was there the night that it's none of that. She's a woman that you might pass up on the street if she had a little sign that said, "Will heal," Force user, however you wanted to put it. You might dismiss her. But I love how that provokes a conversation with Cassian and Bix about the fact that most of the universe does not see the all-powerful Force, light versus dark, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that Cyril, I wanted what Ursa said. I wanted him to embrace, maybe not necessarily the good, but I wanted him to take a proactive step into saying, I've been on the wrong team. Let's see what you guys have to offer. And we don't get that. And in the cruelest of cruel ironies, he's killed by the pacifist leader of the Gohrman resistance, someone who has pledged against violence the whole arc. And I suspect it's not because he thought Cyril was some imperial traitor, but because they imply that Cyril was having a relationship with his daughter. And, basically possibly two-timing Dedra. His relationship with Dedra, we mentioned in the earlier arcs, is so damaged and so like cosplaying a real human emotions that I think under the course of a year of spending with the resistance and feeding them, BS information and so forth, I think that young girl, the daughter of the resistance leader, she seems like sort of an open and caring and passionate young lady. I feel like she probably awakened things in Cyril emotionally that he wasn't ever going to get from Dedra. And so whether or not they actually ever took it to a physical relationship or whether it was just this sort of emotional soul sharing or the like, you can, there's a familiarity there when she slaps him and he's like, I think we can still save this, salvage this. And you just realize they've been texting each other. They're talking late at night when Dedra's asleep. There's something going on there that he's getting from her that he's not getting from his current flame. And I think that's why Dad pulls the trigger finally, because I think Dad's like, you look what your empire has brought upon us, and you're involved with my daughter. And I think, I think that's just as much to do with it as him trying to kill Andor. I don't even know if the resistance guy sees Andor. And that brings me to just the absolute thing that deflates Cyril's ego and everything. He focused on Cassian from way back in season 1, like Inspector Javert, hunting down Jean Valjean. And, whether it was conscious or subconscious, I bet you that a day didn't go past that he didn't think about getting his hands on Cassian and making him pay for everything he's ever done or he thinks he's done. And so he's like a singular target of Cyril's impotence and rage and all of this. And Cassian, who obviously has been an intelligence agent for the rebellion and for Luthen and so forth, and has had many disguises and many aliases and many missions. He just looks at him like clearly clueless and says, "Who are you? Like, I haven't thought about you at all. You know, we ran into each other on Ferrex. I held a gun to your head and managed to get away. I don't remember what you look like. I don't remember who you are or what purpose you have." And just the look on Kyle Soller, the actor's face, as he's realized, like, what? My entire life's mission now, and he doesn't even know who I am. Like, he doesn't know why this is happening. Man, that is something as far as just, and then before he can, put the gun down, he starts to lower his blaster, and then boom, he gets taken out so cruelly. And then we see Dedra in the safe room, the communications room, and she's grieving and she's struggling and she's twitching. But I don't think that has anything to do with Cyril. I don't think she knows. I think it's, as you say, the realization. I think that she didn't really think the Empire was going to go through with Plan A. I think it was always going to be about half measures and so forth. And this escalation by Palpatine and his men. I mean, did you catch the captain they sent for her to actually be the enforcer? Like, he wasn't some raging, spit-flying, tyrannical, march! Like, his voice never rose above room temperature. And his expression the entire show for the 2 episodes we got with him was just blank. Like, whatever atrocities were in front of him, whatever, children being shot in the streets and the KX droids marching through and throwing them like bowling pins and crushing skulls and so forth. He just looked like, he was out for a walk in the park. The implacability of evil is something that this show has always captured very well. And Captain Kaido, I believe it was his name, Kaido, he was the perfect Imperial in that nothing he saw fazed him. His blood pressure probably never got up above 72 beats per minute, his pulse rate and so forth. This was just a day in the office, right? This just calm, detached, these aren't real people. This isn't real blood in the streets. Innocent, guilty, it doesn't matter. I'm here to enforce the will of my superiors. And he puts that on Dedra. He says, I'm the trigger, you're the finger. So he like makes a big show out of saying, give the order. And Dedra's like, proceed. And then it's just out of that. So that was tremendous. I think you mentioned the Rebels episode, because I rewatched that Rebels episode immediately after this. And it's funny, behind the scenes, Tony and Dan, brothers, established Hollywood screenwriters. Dan was like, do I have to stay to this like template exactly? Do I have to work with this script that they used? And Tony's like, no. And they don't ever contradict canon, but they do give it some extra layers. And if you know Rebels, as I did, you can hear them because they say things like, you're not taking her to Yavin, that's another team. And they want to bring her in with the fleet or some, I mean, there's references to set it up. So while it seems like it would have been a very straightforward thing for Cassian to get her on a ship and fly off to Yavin, which obviously he knows where that is, they respected what had already come before enough to say, like, no, it didn't quite work the way you imagined it. And yeah, the dialogue was a little different because Rebels was written for, family audiences. It's an animated show. They're not really going to go into the nuance of genocide and the politics of it all. But I'll tell you what amazed me is that they mentioned Gohrman. I mean, it's obvious that Gilroy's watched the episode because in that animated show from 2016, with no context that we had, Mon Mothma references, the massacre at Gohrman has gone too far. So that was the first reference to something that happened off screen, and the Gilroys clearly just said, all right, so let's explore what happened at Gohrman. Let's give that a whole meat and potatoes kind of feel. So I thought that was
I think that's important because that's balance. And here's what I mean by balance. It's balance of fanboy service. Let me start that over. It's balance of being able to give the layers, like you said, without diving too far into fanboy service or trying to redirect the entire thing, which, sorry, but that's my argument, especially for episodes 8 and 9, is that they tried to go way too far away and establish something different, but still having the layer of canon that's there, or still having the idea there, where with Andor it feels like it all flows properly the way it should be. It's still giving that service that you're talking about, because that's important to me, because it plays into it makes me want to watch Rebels now, quite frankly.
Right.
And it does it without going overboard, or again without changing the complete course of what we know. And I think that's important to Star Wars fans. I think it's important to Star Trek fans too. I think it's important to anyone who likes a series a certain way. Which, if we ever do a Twin Peaks podcast, you'll hear my issues with season 3 of that. So I think that's really good. And I'm going to bring up the Cyril thing, because I think this is also important. And this goes to Urza's point. I'd rather see Cyril upset that the Empire didn't work versus joining the other side. I think those are two different things.
Yes, they are.
I really think they're two different things. And I think it adds depth to the idea that Urza brought up, that the Empire wasn't really the ultimate evil, in a sense, right? Again, some people liked it. And you could also make the argument that they were doing some good for the galaxy by trying to put order in place, in a sense. You could make that argument, right? So I think there's a little piece of that too, which again kind of brings me to this idea that, which I liked in episode 6, where not everyone knew about Luke, or it was just a rumor. Like, it helped back that up, because really the Jedi and the Sith could be on a more minute level, right? Unless you interacted with them personally, it does make the universe look huge. It does make the galaxy look huge, to the point that you maybe only heard a rumor, or it wound up being a bedtime story, like we see in in Skeleton Crew, right? He's reading a childhood book about the Jedi, and it's just it's a nighttime story. It's a bedtime story, because unless you were there on that level, do you really know? Like, is it really that accurate? Or is it something completely different? So that's been the beauty of the past couple series that we've watched here, is that we're seeing some different things that mix into those layers that Psyllium Maas is so wonderfully bringing up here. And I think that's what makes this even better, because the other question I had in my head was, do I want to see a season 3? And they've already said no to this. And I saw Diego Luna doing an interview, and I like, this is kind of a Jordan thing a little bit. At least the first, when Jordan retires after the second three-peat, people were like, what is he doing? Why? But his idea partially was, I'm going to go out at the top of my game, right? Jim Brown did the same thing. Like, that dude shouldn't have retired when he did, but he's like, I'm going out at the top of my game, and it almost adds an extra aura. Seinfeld too, my wife just brought up. Seinfeld goes out at the right time, in a sense too, because it lead, and to use my students' terms, this aura about those people to a next level, in a sense. And so, though I would love to see another season, to see what Luthen's doing, and we never see Cassian's sister. Like, does he ever go after her? Like, where's she at? Is he going to go try and find Bix? What's Bix doing? Does Luthen have Bix doing something now? Are they working together? There's so many things you could probably go with, and maybe they're doing that on purpose, or they're just leaving it out there a little bit, because maybe they'll do a quick little, 3-episode series or something with that. Guys, it also gives the possibility that we could see Luthen in a future episode, right? I mean, I know he's old here, but does he show up in Ahsoka? Does he, I kind of like that there's some possibilities out there for those things. All right, I'll shut up now. I'll let you guys.
I will say this before we do our Kyber Crystal review. The one thing about the Star Wars Empire, it can be and I don't mean the Imperial Empire. It can be exhausting to keep up with comic books, novels, tie-ins, animated shows, etc., etc. But the beauty of that, The Acolyte was canceled after one season. In my opinion, died too soon. But they've already had comic books. They already have 2 novels coming out published this year, which allows you to continue these stories in perpetuity or do little flashes. I know that Jeannie she wants to know more about what happens in those down years. How did they make their break from Luthen from Arc 2 to Arc 3? What was the final straw that said, okay, we're going to stay on Yavin and we're not going to be part of your spy ring anymore? Like, that's a story you could tell, but maybe you tell it in a comic book, a little mini series. Maybe you tell it as part of a novel. So Andor can live on, but you just, as a fan and as somebody who, does it, you just have to keep your eyes and ears open and try and respond to that as sort of best you can there. I also really quickly want to mention, we finally see Clea put her hair down, figuratively and literally. I just thought that she'd had that tightly coiled look for the first 1.5 seasons of the show, and then in this arc, she's just like, to hell with it. It's shoulder length, and it kind of also represents a little bit of how she and Luthen have kind of fallen. I mean, it's clear that Wilmon has, he is a died and true believer of Luthen. He even says to Cassian, he wants to know when you're ready to come back to work. And when we see that Luthen is taking a step back because Yavin is going to work out, because they have Dodonna, which they name drop, and General Draven, and now Mon Mothma. Like, what he does in the shadows is it might be little guerrilla tactics like Saw was using, as we see Saw in Rogue One, but ultimately the Rebel Alliance is going to step forward.
I think it's bigger than Luthen now. I think that's why, right? Mon Mothma is perfect to pick it up at this point, because they even reference it, right? He even says, I can't keep track of everything. Right? There's too many lives. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what this person, that person, we're too close to getting caught. And I think to almost make it a formal thing now that we are a Rebel Alliance, that's the point where Mon Mothma picks it up. And you said exactly what I was going to say, which is I can see now Luthen taking on the Saw role and just, hey, he believes in the idea of punishing the Empire at any chance he can, of just trying to screw them over at any point. And now he's going to go off on his own and just kind of do that when he gets a chance. I almost feel like that's what he's possibly doing. But again, we don't know unless we see it somewhere else. Real quick on the Acolyte. I think if they would have pivoted to the Pelagius thing earlier, and they would have announced that that's what the next season was going to deal with, I think we would have had it. I just think they brought that whole plot point in way too late, and it lost along the line.
Right.
Whatever.
Agreed.
I know I'm right.
Kyber Crystal ratings, gentlemen, Jedi. I'm going to start first. This is the greenest of the green for me. This arc was incredible. It sets us up for Yavin and Rogue One, and I'm completely stunned, thrilled. Excellent conclusions to many of the storylines. Few open ends for the next arc, but outstanding.
Well, I'll go with they live Roddy Piper, eye green. So I'm gonna go with that.
Nice.
Absolutely fantastic. Though I would like to see one more season, I'm fine with them just calling it right here. And for the love of God, someone hire Diego Luna to just do anything that's out there. And I'll leave it at that.
Bond villain.
Gentlemen, it can't get any greener than the lush hills of Ireland and Scotland, although Scotland can be a little craggy. So I'm going to dedicate those northernmost countries and their lush, verdant hills to this arc of Andor here and to the show overall. Yes. Would we love to see 10 seasons of this? Absolutely, if the quality it remained as high as it has thus far. But I think I just want to keep it in perspective, because some of the things I've been reading online, everyone's like, this is the future of Star Wars. And Star Wars is many things. It's a big tent. It has many points of view. And this outstanding storytelling works part and parcel with things that we get, say, in Ahsoka, or the unexpected delights of Skeleton Crew, or the nostalgic charms of Obi-Wan Kenobi, or so forth. Star Wars can be a lot of things to a lot of different people, but Andor is not going to sell Grogu dolls, and it's probably not going to sell pajama sets and so forth. It's a gritty, real, painful, I would argue R-rated. Like, I know they don't rate television shows as they do movies, but this is a mature. This is not something that, I would think 8-year-olds would sit down in front of the television and be rapt. I mean, aside from the action sequences and K2SO, and there he is, finally. We see how they met, and now Alan Tudyk will give us hopefully some much needed comic relief in the final 3 episodes. But Andor, it's an outlier. It's an example of what heights Star Wars can reach, and they should continue to push the envelope and not settle on old tropes and nostalgia. But in the same breath, I get just as excited seeing a Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Ahsoka arc, or The Mandalorian, which we'll next see on the big screen. Those are just as much Star Wars to me as this. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that Tony Gilroy came in and said, you know what, I really want to shake things up. I don't really care. I'm not invested in Star Wars, but I want to tell this story. And I think it's been magnificent. And it very easily could have gone sideways. But he's done such a fantastic job. Kudos to him, to his brother John, who's the editor, to Dan. But yes, Star Wars it's a big galaxy far, far away. And so I'm just so happy that we can have excited discussions about, what's possible.
Absolutely. And the denouement comes next week. Disney Plus streaming services. This episode will end up airing a little bit after the series concludes, but fans of Andor, thank you for coming with us. This is our 69th episode. Nice. And we are looking forward to many, many more Star Wars episodes going forward and back to that galaxy a long, long time ago and far, far away.